In today's episode, we're going back to the Xbox 360, and we're talking about one of my favourite Rockstar games ever, Red Dead Redemption. As usual, we're going to do a bit of a retrospective, talk about parts of the story, gameplay, personal experiences, and more. Fair warning, there will be a lot of spoilers in here, so bow out now if you don't want to ruin it for yourself. Still here? Then let's get into the next episode of RetroVival. Without a doubt, this was one of my most hype games growing up. I rewatched every single gameplay preview Rockstar uploaded so many times, and I still look back on these previews as some of the best ever. They did such a good job informing the players on what to expect with the game. They covered everything from the weapons to the stores, horses, activities, and animals. I remember my mum coming back from GameStop and she picked up the guide as a surprise too. I never used it for the story, but it was great for studying the map and finding useful items like the herbs. I ended up using it again recently when replaying it to track down some of the flowers I needed for a side quest. I knew going in that I was going to love the game, but I never could have anticipated how much Red Dead Redemption and Jack Marston would have affected me. So the Van der Linde gang were once family to John, his wife Abigail and son Jack, but they've been disbanded for years. John's been living the quiet life, but now finds himself having to hunt down 3 of his former brothers to save his family and himself. First, we've got Uncle. Uncle's a bit of an odd character to say the least. He wasn't known as the most useful member of the gang, and he's still not very useful living on John's ranch now, but he's still a very lovable character despite that. Uncle introduced the gang to Abigail Roberts, an orphaned prostitute who eventually went on to join the gang and become the wife of our main character. Abigail Marston is one of my favourite characters in the Red Dead series. You see her character develop more in Redemption 2, but in this game herself and John have really great chemistry, and I found myself really rooting for them.
John! You have got to go deal with them. They've broken into the silo again and are eating all the corn out from it.
Of course, my angel.
Wait, get out of there!
All right.
Come on! Scat! Shh.
They had their son Jack Marston while travelling around with the gang, and unfortunately lost Jack's younger sister in the time between games. Jack's become a really well-mannered teenager with a love for reading. You'll get to see John try to reconnect with Jack and teach him how to survive out in the Old West. Bill Williamson is a former soldier and a big troublemaker. Bill was always a bit of a hothead, but when we meet him in Red Dead Redemption, it's clear he's become even more violent and dangerous from when John last seen him. But Bill's also a great example of a character in the world of Red Dead that's actually a lot deeper than appears on the surface level. There's hints to this in Redemption 1, but in 2 you get a much better example of his personality and his issues. He shows sign of several different mental health issues, unresolved and hidden personal issues and challenges. You could just write Bill off as being a simple, straightforward character, but much like a lot of the Red Dead characters, there's a lot more to him if you pay attention. Javier Escuela was a friendly and trustworthy member of the Van der Linde gang. He's one of my favourite characters from Redemption 2. He's without a doubt a ride or die kind of person. Unfortunately for Javier, John, and even us the player, Dutch Van der Linde's declining state of mind absolutely shattered Javier, and took this once friendly and trustworthy gang member and turned him into a much more violent and aggressive person. Dutch Van der Linde was a charismatic and influential leader, a father and brother figure to many of the gang's members. When we see Dutch in Redemption 1, we see that he's gone from looking like riches to rags, and gang leader to borderline cult leader between both games. Without much spoilers for 2, the interesting thing with Red Dead Redemption now is that if you've played the sequel, which is technically a prequel, it makes some of the things John has to do and see feel pretty heartbreaking with the added context. It fleshes out characters who maybe could have just been written off as angry bad guys you have to kill or capture, with Javier for example being a character you'll definitely grow to love in Redemption 2. It really does add so much more context and depth to an already fantastic group of characters. We start our adventure in Red Dead Redemption at a dock in the town of Blackwater. We meet our main character Jack Marston and discover he's working for the law. but it's not out of choice. John's a former outlaw, and unfortunately for him, the law has caught up with him, specifically a lawman by the name of Edgar Ross, and his partner Archer Fordham. They're using John's wife and son against him, so he needs to hunt down and kill or capture members of his old gang in order to see them again and be a free man. John boards a train to the town of Armadillo, where while on it you'll get to see a lot of the different kinds of people that make up this part of the Old West. You'll even run into some of these people through the Stranger's side missions throughout the game, and there's even a main character, Bonnie MacFarlane, that you can see in the back of the train at the start too. The overall story of this game is just fantastic. It'll take you from the town of Armadillo to the likes of Henniganstead Ranch, down to Mexico, and then up north to the city of Blackwater and the dense and dangerous woodlands of tall trees. There's so many shocking and engaging story moments, some absolutely badass sections, where John and others can storm Fort Mercer, or even just getting caught up in an old-fashioned standoff after a bad game of poker. You'll grow to love John and root for him to reunite with his family. The only criticism I'll give the story is honestly just the Mexico sequence. It is one of the greatest music moments in gaming when you finally reach the region, with Jose Gonzalez's Far Away playing as you ride through the desert. It has Landon Ricketts, who is without a doubt one of the best characters in the game. You play both sides in a Revolutionary War, and hunt down Bill Williamson and Javier Escuela. The main issue I have is a lot of the missions revolve around you travelling from one corner of the map to the other, only to have to go the whole way back as part of the mission. It makes this section drag quite a bit from my experience compared to the rest of the game. But in saying this, it still does have some of the best missions in the entire game, like protecting a train while enemies are trying to hop on board, setting an ambush on a road for an upcoming convoy, and even just taking part in the war itself. It's really just the busy work missions and filler feeling missions that bog it down a bit. There's more of them throughout the entire game, but I feel like Mexico got hit a bit worse with them. It really is one of the only criticisms I've ever had of the game. There's two other great music moments in the game that really add to the feeling of the story. The song Compass by Jamie Liddell plays when John's finally riding home to see his family, and during the credits Dead Man's Gun by Ashtar Command just hits you in the feels after experiencing the ending. And speaking of the ending, let's just talk about the elephant in the room for a minute.
Take a look at that. Jack, go into the house, lock all the doors. Whatever happens, don't come outside. You hear me? Whatever happens.
Okay.
Come here, son. Whatever happens, keep the doors locked and your mother inside. Promise me, son. Promise me.
Who is it, Pa?
It's just some old friends. Me and Uncle take care of it. Now you go inside and you keep the doors and the windows locked.
I hear you.
Then run!
Yeah, run, boy.
Well, old man, looks like things is about to get settled once and for all.
So it seems.
So I'm just after replaying the game for the first time in years, and after playing Redemption 2, it definitely gives you a different context and feeling to the ending of this game. It makes it hit a lot more. John Marston's death was the first time a game ever made me choke up. Like, I was in bits. I genuinely didn't see it coming. I thought the door was going to open and I was going to dead-eye everyone, or that Bonnie MacFarlane, Marshall and other people John had helped were going to somehow come riding in like the Avengers. But that didn't happen. The door opens, you enter Deadeye, you shoot a few people, but then John is overwhelmed with gunfire. He drops his gun, stares down Edgar Ross and the other lawmen and soldiers, falls to his knees, takes his last few breaths, and his story ends. Ross manipulated John to finally get the remaining Van der Linde members, but then once he was of no use to him anymore, just did the same to him. His outlaw past finally caught up to him, and with that, delivered one of the greatest and most impactful endings in gaming. The epilogue has you take control of a now older Jack, and just to add that extra gut punch, we see that Abigail has passed away since we last saw her mourning John. The game does give you a bit of closure though, and in story perspective, Jack actually gets closure too. As Jack, the epilogue sees you track down a now retired Edgar Ross. He's hunting with his brother down in Mexico, and Jack confronts him, and he hasn't changed one bit. They enter a duel and you put as many rounds into that piece of crap as Deadeye and your sidearm will allow you. He turns around and the last shot of the main story we see is a close-in freeze frame shot of Jack and the title of the game. Other than the members of our old crew, Redemption is full of fun characters you'll befriend, reluctantly help out, or put up with throughout the story, with some of my favourites being Bonnie MacFarlane, the daughter of rancher Drew MacFarlane, and someone who becomes John's earliest and one of his most trusted allies. She patches John up after an early encounter with Bill Williamson goes sideways, and gets John to prove himself as a rancher, while also acting as a well-executed tutorial for the player. She'll teach you to shoot, race, and more. She also gives you your first house in the game to save, resupply, and change outfits. Bonnie's got a great spark to her. She'll call John out if she feels like he's in the wrong, give him advice, and really tries to send him on the best possible path forward. And with Bonnie as well, there is some moments in the storyline where I feel like it does hint that she likes him quite a bit. Nigel West Dickens is literally a snake oil salesman. He travels around the West selling his wares to easily swindles people, and often gets himself in trouble doing so. He's a con man, but at the same time, he does give us one very handy resource. After drinking his tonic, John unlocks Deadeye 2. Now maybe John just got his gunslinging mojo back, or maybe, just maybe, Nigel might actually have some legitimate products in that wagon of his. Next we've got Lee Johnson, otherwise known as Marshall. He's the law in and around the town of Armadillo. Him alongside his 2 deputies are a massive help to John in the story. He's got the feeling of an old school sheriff who doesn't take any crap and isn't afraid to fight alongside John when needed. There's Seth, who's a freak, Irish, who's a drunk, cheers for that rockstar. Harold McDougal is a scholar from Yale studying Native American culture. Let's just put it this way, he's been sniffing more than the fresh mountain air. We meet Nastas, who's working as an informant for the government, and he ends up helping out Harold with his studies, as well as providing information on Dutch's new gang. Landon Ricketts, who's a legendary hero of the Old West, and trains John on how to use Deadeye to its limits. He's also a character that has some really cool, intense story moments. He's lived a lot of life and he tries to pass on whatever knowledge and advice he can to John. That's just some of them, but there's a bunch of other fun, deplorable, or interesting characters to encounter in the main story, along with the Stranger's missions too. The map of Red Dead Redemption takes you to a variety of locations, with some of my favourite locations being tall trees, a massive woodland in the 3rd region of the map. You'll encounter deer, wolves and bears as you navigate through it. It's a really fun region to hunt in, mess around in the online mode, and more. Towns like Armadillo and the eerie abandoned town of Tumbleweed really capture that western aesthetic. MacFarlane's ranch actually feels like a functional farm, and it always felt like a safe haven while playing the game. Blackwater is like you've entered a completely different world, with its tall brick buildings and more modern influence. The towns in Mexico completely have their own unique architecture and vibe to them, compared to New Austin. And the desert itself is vast and often unforgiving. The locations in the game will stick with you, and if you were lucky enough to experience the online, they'll have even more of a lasting memory. Red Dead Redemption plays like a traditional third-person shooter, with cover mechanics and the slow-mo Deadeye system, adding their own variety to the gunplay. It shows its age a bit these days, but it's still really easy and fun to hop into after a long time, or even for the first time. Travelling around the map, hunting and gathering resources was always fun, especially going after some of the legendary animals you could find, trading at the shops and buying new gear and weapons, meeting goals to unlock new outfits for John, and then going after bounties, helping out on the ranch, playing blackjack or poker, five-finger fillet or dice. You can also tackle the different gang hideouts throughout the game for some extra cash and gear. There's a ton of activities to do in the game, other than the main story missions. The remasters of Red Dead Redemption broke my heart a lot. It's not because they were bad. They did have some issues, but it was mainly because they excluded quite possibly one of the funnest online modes of the Xbox 360 and PS3 era. You could boot into free roam or go into stuff like Team Deathmatch, Grab Bag and more. They even added co-op missions with one of the game's DLC. The online for this game was genuinely so fun. I have so many memories of messing around in free roam with my friends, or holding out against the undead in the zombie horde mode they added with the Undead Nightmare release. I remember meeting a group of random people, and them inviting me to their Xbox party chat. They were all riding around together and recruiting people or fighting whoever started on them. It became a frequent thing to hop on Red Dead and join this group, and we'd end up doing stuff like gang hideouts, stage our own shootouts on horseback or in towns. It was really fun. You unlocked things by just leveling up, with new guns, mounts and characters unlocking every few levels. It was a simple system with no in-game currency, no microtransactions and no real restrictions on what you could do. Want to go fight a horde of bears or wolves? Go do it. Take on a gang hideout, hold out in the bank, try to free run across the roofs of Blackwater or Armadillo, It felt a bit arcadey and they were pretty generous with your health when it came to stuff like falling. It was such a fun and nostalgic mode, and I really wish they just let themselves look past the lack of microtransactions and allowed people to relive those memories, or even experience it for the first time. I feel like if this version of Red Dead Online released today, it'd be a massive hit because of its simplicity and easy to jump into nature.
What is going on?
Well, sir, I am a man of science, a man of great learning, a thinker, a wise man, and I'll be honest with you, sir, I haven't got a fucking clue.
I could spend a while on this, but I'll keep it brief. Undead Nightmare was one of the best expansions ever, in my opinion. It joins the likes of Ballad of Gay Tony and The Lost and Damned, along with the likes of Phantom Liberty and more. It's tongue-in-cheek B-movie horror, with some really fun gameplay and an entertaining storyline. You take control of John sometime before the ending of the game. Uncle shows up to the house acting strange and proceeds to bite Abigail, causing her to turn into a zombie, and she in turn goes on to infect Jack too. Poor Uncle gets absolutely domed, but Abigail and Jack get hogtied and kept in the house until John can figure out what's causing their condition. You'll end up revisiting a bunch of the characters you encountered in the main game. Some of them will fare better than others. The town and cities that were once safe escapes from the wilderness are now deadly to travel through because of the hordes of the undead roaming around every corner. It's such a fun expansion, and I highly recommend giving it a go if you haven't already. GTA 5 and Red Dead 2 without a doubt should have gotten something like an Undead Nightmare DLC. Red Dead 2 could have gone all in on the survival elements with food and so on. And then GTA could have been straight up Rockstar Walking Dead. I really hope they revisit this in the future, or even do an alternate viewpoint DLC like Ballad of Gay Tony and The Lost and Damned. Even getting that different perspective of Red Dead Redemption 2 or GTA 5 storyline would have been so cool. This game remains as one of my favourites of all time. You can definitely notice its age these days in terms of its gameplay and even its missions, but it's got such a charm and fantastic variety of characters and locations. Fun gameplay, a great DLC, and it had a fantastic online too. Red Dead Redemption will always be one of my favourite games ever. And even with the lack of online for the remasters, I'm still glad such a great game is now more accessible than ever. I'm really excited to finish off all the remaining side missions I have, and maybe even try to finish off Undead Nightmare 2. And replaying through the game has really made me want to go back and play Red Dead Redemption 2. I haven't actually revisited it since I played it for the first time. And that does it for another edition of RetroVival. Let me know what you thought in the comment section below, and what are your thoughts on Red Dead Redemption? I'd love to read them. With that all said, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
We tried to change. I mean, isn't that what you're supposed to do?
We did change. And it's over now.